Hello everyone. Today we talk with Honor Gunday. He actually has an outstanding experience. He is CEO and founder of Paymentwall and also a couple of other startups. And then before he had some great experience in startups. So hello Honor.
Hi, how's it going?
It's great. So will you tell us a little bit how have you started Paymentwall actually, how the idea came up to you?
Okay. So I mean, at the beginning, as you know, there was Facebook. So I had some experiences building my own social network, and Facebook killed it. We had a group of social networks that we had built to enhance the sales that we were doing through an e-commerce platform that we had built in 2000 and let's say 2007, 2006, something like that. So we had a social network that became really popular in Turkey, and then we had some divisions of it, basically a clone of it for the Russian market, Ukrainian market, one for the Mexican market. What we were trying to do was we were trying to get this e-commerce platform off the ground and then generating free traffic from the social networks and so on that we also would create. But the social network became really popular, and the sales platform, which was called Closo, it did also really well, but we had to do the sales ourselves. So I basically had a warehouse in Seattle, Washington, packaging laptops and electronics, shipping them over to the UK, doing cross-border trade. We did decent volumes and so on, and with that, I was able to fund the operations. That was 2005-06 up to 2000 and maybe 9. And then 2009, the Turkish government shut down the social network. They basically found some content that they didn't like, so the website was shut down, and I said, okay, I need to find another thing to do because I have no future, obviously, with the social network. So I had started at the same time in 2007, 2008, an incubator. Obviously, Russians, Ukrainians are very smart, and they're really good in development. So I was already working with people from Russia as I was a student in Stanford. I used to try to do some projects with people in Siberia, people in Moscow, people in Ukraine, and so on. And eventually, in 2004, I traveled to Kiev, and I actually opened an office with my co-founder that I met at the time. His name is Vladimir Kovalyov. And with him, we basically, had done some projects together. And then we decided that since our projects themselves were not going so well, maybe we could provide incubation from the outside, because incubators were really popular in Silicon Valley. There were some big examples like Idea Lab, Engage, and so on. So companies would go to these incubators, they would give some funding, and they would have shared resources developing the product. So what I did was I built an incubator that was not co-located. So we didn't house the startup. We basically built the startups in Silicon Valley from Kiev. So that's why it was called Outcubator. So I got engaged with 3 startups, 2 out of San Francisco and 1 out of Seattle, and we did a good job with those. And we obviously took some equity, and then we also connected them with some investors. And when they got the funding, we used the funding efficiently to build up the startup and so on. So fast forward into 2000 and let's say 9, 10. I decided to start an advertising business that was, again, based off of an idea that we had already executed on. We had a patent on it. It basically allowed people, it was a company called AdPerk that we had helped. AdPerk allowed you to watch video ads, and then you basically earned points, and you could convert those points into credits inside the platform, and then you could get a magazine subscription. So it was an idea to reinvigorate the dying magazine industry with the digitization. So that was a good idea, but I thought it would be better to apply the same idea to Facebook games. Obviously, you would have a higher volume of transactions because there would be more people interested in games rather than magazines, and then people could basically take offers and not watch ads necessarily, but maybe go sign up for Netflix or go sign up for some other service, and then in return we would get a kickback, a lead fee, or like a CPA on an ad. Let's say Netflix used to pay $30, we would take 15, and then give 15 to the game developer, buy the virtual currency inside the game, and then using that basically give the $15 worth of virtual currency inside the game to the user. So that was a project that we did. And then I had an investor. He actually was the CFO of PayPal. And the project didn't go so well, unfortunately, because we didn't have enough funding. It basically didn't take off. And we were not able to pay our employees. We had a bunch of people in the so I survived, the dot-com crisis. When I graduated from Stanford, I moved to Seattle and I did, Expedia for 2 years, and then I started my own startup. And then this crisis in 2008, 2009 eliminated all the jobs in San Francisco. So I had to basically figure out what to do. But this startup that we had helped us because we were able to get labor here in San Francisco. Typically, labor cost is really high. We were able to get really qualified people helping us out for free because they had nothing to do. They had nowhere to go to. There were a lot of layoffs, like tens of thousands of people and so on. So using those people and some interns, we were able to still run this advertising business, but it didn't go where we wanted to go. So, and there was a lot of competition. So at some point in time, I realized I had run out of all the cash in my bank account. I told the investor, hey, we don't have enough money. He said he was not going to invest anymore. And he hadn't invested that much anyways, 30, 40,000. So we basically ended it. And then I had to start something else. I asked the team, hey, actually, the story is I woke up with a car crash. I crashed into the main square in San Francisco, trying to figure out, how to close some business deals. I had gone drinking one night with a potential client from Japan, and after he left, I basically crashed my brand new car into the main square. So in the morning, I woke up, I'm like in jail. And I'm like, what happened last night? And then I realized, maybe I need to rethink what I'm doing. So I realized we need to start something from scratch. And I thought, the games had potential. They had a lot of traffic from Southeast Asia, but there was no way to monetize the traffic. So they had traffic from Vietnam, Philippines, all these places. There were no CPA ads in these markets. And also there were no payment options that they could pay with, like PayPal. So what I did was I said, okay, maybe we have an opportunity with payments. Let's try to figure out what payment options are there. So we Googled, we tried to find payment providers in Southeast Asia. We integrated them onto the platform. We stayed up late nights sessions here in San Francisco to work with Southeast Asian companies. And then we integrated them all, maybe 20, 30 companies. And then we turned it on for all the games, and they started making money. And they couldn't believe their eyes because these games would turn off the game itself to not have to pay the server cost. Because obviously, if you have 1 million gamers playing the game, and if they pay you nothing, you have a big server cost, like $10,000, $20,000 a month, and you can't afford that with no income. So, and you cannot sell that game to anybody because it has Southeast Asian users. Back then, nobody valued those users. So what we did was we changed the game for Facebook games. We were able to basically monetize this traffic. And then we decided to expand to new regions. We expanded to Russia. We expanded to Europe, Latin America, all the developing markets. And we solved a really big need for the digital content owners. And then in 2011, Facebook shut down the game service providers, like third-party payment providers and advertising providers, both. So we're like, okay, we're screwed now. So we had just expanded to the dating industry. We were slowly becoming like a hot company for the dating companies because they have the same digital footprint. Usually they expand globally. Not as much as games, but still. So that helped us actually survive. And then Facebook, eliminated all the companies. The VCs pulled out all their money, and we were able to get the traffic from all the dead companies because VCs pulled the plugs. We were not VC funded, and we had no other hope. I'm not going to start another business, obviously, at that point in time. So we took all the traffic from the dying VC funded companies, and then that's how Paymentwall began. And that was year one, 2011. Our revenue surged really high. We went, really crazy because we brought to the market a new opportunity for developers to make money.
It's very, up and down story, but finally you have found a solution and you reached the product market fit.
It had to happen quickly because you either reach the product market fit or you die. So you have a 50-50 chance. But I'm happy we survived. And, after we actually couldn't believe that our company could survive because we had seen everybody die. So in 3 years time, 5 years time, I expected this company to die, Paymentwall, but it didn't. So I couldn't believe, and my team couldn't believe that we had our first success, and we realized we have to hold on to this baby and make sure that it grows past the 5 years of age. And now we're 10 years old. So in the last 2-3 years, I've been thinking, how can we restructure this company? Because obviously we survived, and yes, we should be proud of that, but I think we have to stop being proud of that and start moving on to the future. Now let's plan for the next 10 years. As you know, in the Soviet Union, they used to have these 5-year plans. So we decided to figure out what our next 5-year plan is. And we decided to launch new products that are in adjacent spaces based on our learnings. So one product is FasterPay. It's an e-wallet. It's an independent company. It's based out of the UK. And it has recently acquired the licenses that we had already applied for 5 years prior in the US. So we're a multi-jurisdiction e-wallet. Soon we will be getting our license from Lithuania for the EU because of Brexit. So we'll have the UK license, the EU license, and the US licenses, making us basically, from a licensing standpoint, one of the few multi-jurisdiction e-wallets.
Why e-wallets? I mean, there was solutions at that time, I guess. Payoneer maybe.
Yeah, Payoneer is popular, but Payoneer is more popular for like remittance. I would say it's a different market. So Payoneer does act as an e-wallet because it stores the funds for like people who store their money inside the card. But an e-wallet is slightly different, I would say, because with an e-wallet, you can the user is given a choice. It's not like a PSP where the money just flows through the PSP. With an e-wallet, the PSP is no longer in the background; it comes to the forefront. So the user has a personal relationship with the e-wallet, and they have to trust the e-wallet and they have to like it. And then the merchants also need to trust the e-wallet and they have to like it. So the sales process is a bit different. It's no longer a commodity product. It's actually something that creates a personal feeling for the user. So, and then from a logistical standpoint and licensing standpoint, it's slightly different. Also, you're storing the funds and you have many more opportunities when you store the funds because now you have control over the money and you can move the money from one merchant to the other. You can move the money from one user to the other. Whereas with the e-wallet, the PSP, the money just flows from the user to the website or to the merchant. And it's just a one-way thing. E-wallet brings opportunities that are multi-directional.
Mm-hmm. And how do you operate? I mean, do you work like a bank or do you partner with different banks in different countries?
E-money licensed entities are required to have a segregated bank account from a compliance standpoint. So PSPs also need to have it too, but e-wallets need to have it more, and it has to be regulated by the authority that regulates it. So we are multi-jurisdictional. So what we do is when we onboard the user or the merchant, we lock them into a jurisdiction, and then we are regulated for that entity in that jurisdiction. So if we had a license in Russia, which we don't have, the Russian users would basically be regulated by the Russian authorities. But a Russian person could also open an e-wallet account using FasterPay in the European Union. It's allowed, as long as we don't put billboard ads in, Russia on the highway. Hey, come and open a FasterPay account. We're fine, and we can onboard them as long as we do some due diligence, check their backgrounds and things like that. So that's what the regulation allows, and that's what we're doing.
And what is your actually 5-year plan? How are you going to, I don't know, rule the world?
Yeah, I mean, ruling the world, of course, that's like, what everybody wants to do, right? But that takes a lot of effort. So I would say we can claim that we are doing a good job in the gaming space, in the not gambling games. That was the first space that we started off from, and I think we became the first the pioneer in adding the alternative payment options. And two, I think we also provided an excellent service for the gaming industry. So we gained the trust of all the game developers of the world, and we became the #1 provider that is an independent provider. So why do I say that? Because if you look at game distribution and game sales, well, obviously the iOS, on iTunes and so on, you have a lot of games, and a lot of games are sold through Apple's platform. A lot of games are sold through Google Play, and then a lot of games are sold through Steam, and then Xbox, Nintendo, and all these platforms. So I can't say we're bigger than these, but I can say that for any game company that wants to sell their game directly to the users, then we are the biggest player in the space. We provide services to so many accounts I cannot even count. Mm-hmm. So that was achieved already. So I can't say that's something I care about in the next 5 years. What I did is I separated out a brand called Terminal 3, which is servicing that gaming industry with a unique brand. So that was one of the decisions that we made, that we want to segregate our gaming space and provide them more specialized services. Because if you have a success, that's great, but what do you do with that success? We had to go deeper and so on. So that's what Terminal 3 does. And then the second idea was to focus on the FinTech vertical, in the payment space, especially, which is FasterPay. So creating a brand that people trust, that people can store money with if they want, or an easy way for people to move money back and forth and so on. Now, you have a lot of neobanks that got created in Europe. You have Monzo, you have Monese, you have N26 in Germany, you have Revolut and so on. So these are great products also. They focus more on the consumer. We are a bit unique because we focus more on the merchants and also the consumer. So we are B2B2C, whereas those companies are B2C. And I think our strategy is a bit more universal because we're acquiring users through the merchants that we onboard. And I think that's a better model from a cost efficiency standpoint. So that's kind of what we focus on.
And which markets are interesting for you? For example, it's only already developed markets, or also Asian, Africa, and stuff like that?
So that was part of it. That's a great question. It's a good segue into the 5-year plan answer also, because in the world domination. So I said to myself, look, we built something that's decent, and we already service Southeast Asia. That's where we started from. We service Russia. We have great partners in Russia. We service European markets. We service also Latin America, Brazil. Latin America and Brazil is a bit slightly different because of the language, Portuguese versus Spanish. We service the US market. That's also where we're born out of. And then China was a difficult market, but we conquered it in our second year of operations. We created great relationships in China. Since 2011, we've been operating in China. That's 9 years now. We had opened up an office in Beijing. So I said to myself, well, we conquered the digital space, but we didn't do so well conquering the e-commerce space. So for that, I wanted to go to the source of where all the products are built or produced. If you look at the greater Bay Area in southern China, right next to Hong Kong, there's a series of cities from Shenzhen to Guangzhou to Zhuhai, which is Macau, next to Macau. you have a whole bay of different manufacturing cities in the Pearl River Delta. So I decided that we could start off from Shenzhen, which is right next to Hong Kong. It's easy access for us. So we opened up an office there, and that has proved to be a great success because we were able to onboard Chinese merchants who manufacture or who act as an intermediary for Chinese products to be sold globally. So that was the e-commerce space covered through the Shenzhen office. So that was another regional expansion, yet also a vertical expansion. Two, we didn't have any presence in India. We actually had started providing services back in 2010 when we first launched with the gaming industry. In India, we serviced the main social network there as a payment provider, which was called iBibo. And then we also had serviced some dating sites and so on. But doing business in India was quite difficult. We were having problems sending the money. You have to confirm everything 3-4 times. The customers were not like satisfied entirely. And I think India was still developing as a market. It was not ready for the mainstream technology space. But I think in the last few years, it ripened up, and Chinese merchants were looking for new markets to go to. And they saw similarities in India in cost structure and also in market. So they wanted to invade the Indian market, basically. And they kept asking us, do you have Indian payment options? So we decided to go to India, and we opened 2 offices in India. So that was 1.4 billion people covered more. So that means you have China 1.6 billion, you have India 1.4 billion, you have the European Union, it's about 500 million, you have Russia 150 million, you have the US 300 million, and then you have Brazil, which is about 250 million, and then you have Latin America, maybe another 300 million. So we're adding all these people up, and we're covering, good chunks of world populations. We had an office in Vietnam that's 100 million people. We had an office in Philippines that's about 90 to 100 million people. Japan was missing, so we went to the Japanese market. We didn't create a presence there, but we created partnerships so we can process payments better. And then Africa was missing. Africa was a big unknown to us. It's the continent that we don't really have familiarity with. So me and my colleagues, we basically spent about a month traveling across Africa. We went city by city to all the relevant places that we had seen any lights. So people assume Africa is not developed, but in the last 10 years, they've also gone a long way. I mean, I wouldn't say there's not much of a difference between Novosibirsk or Tomsk. I haven't been to Tomsk, but Novosibirsk and, let's say, Nairobi. I would say Nairobi is actually more developed than Novosibirsk. So
I believe in that, yeah.
So I mean, people are like, oh, how could Africa be more developed? Well, it is, because these are capital cities. They receive a lot of foreign investment. There has been a lot of Chinese investment for infrastructure, for building ports, for airports, for skyscrapers and so on. So you'll see a lot of skyscrapers in cities like Nairobi. If you go to South Africa, I would say it looks like the United States. You do see some poverty and so on, like people living in tin, favelas and so on. It's a bit sad, but at the same time, the overall infrastructure of the country is quite well made and well maintained. It's really beautiful as a country also. And then you go to countries like Tanzania. I went to Zanzibar on a small weekend trip just to see what the country looks like, because we didn't have any business meetings in Kenya. So we flew over to Zanzibar, which is a tropical resort island. You have hotels that are $1,000 a night. I used my points on Expedia to book a hotel. It was spectacular. I had never seen such luxury and so on. They created a beautiful island resort and so on. And then Dar es Salaam also itself is a vibrant metropolis. The country of Tanzania is 50 million people. So it's quite significant population also, population-wise. Mm-hmm. And then we went to Namibia, which is a desert. The city itself is so developed and clean. You would be shocked. We went to Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe is a bit sad because there was a dictator there, and the country had suffered from lack of development and foreign investment because he kicked out all the foreigners from the country, which created some embargoes for Zimbabwe. But otherwise, the people are very educated. In fact, I was looking for a computer vision engineer. I was searching on LinkedIn. I found a Zimbabwean engineer who had studied in Novosibirsk, which is really surprising for me.
Amazing.
yeah, so there's some population, there's some student exchanges happening between Russia and African countries as well. I had also heard some similar stories for different African nations as well. Kenya was quite developed. Nigeria is probably one of the coolest countries I had been to. The people are very vibrant and smart and entrepreneurial, and that country has a 200 million population. So that was my first trip. And then the second trip, I wanted to see Ethiopia. I didn't know Ethiopia had 114 million population, along with Egypt being about 100 million population. So we combined Egypt and Ethiopia. Ethiopia was a bit calm, and they're actually Greek Orthodox, so religion-wise. So a lot of Ethiopians have Greek names, and they believe in the same kind of rules of religion as Russia. So there's actually a connection between Russia, Greece, Bulgaria, and Ethiopia. I was really surprised by that. It's a nice country, but it's a bit calm. People, I think, don't spend that much money. Nigeria is more vibrant, exuberant. It really represents the African spirit, so that was quite exciting. So there are all these markets out there that people can expand to. So I think it's fascinating, and I think we need to include Africa into our plan for the next 5-year plan.
I have spoken with the guy from Ghana. He also said that it's good country, and he said that regulations are not so tight as in Europe or in Russia, for example. It's like a paradise for fintech companies. If you're, for example, lending money for
Paradise,
someone.
but it depends on where you stand and so on, and what kind of partners you have, and also there's a lot of bribery happening in Africa between the governments, regulators, banks, and so on. So you have to really be careful because you can be jailed for misbehaving as a fintech company. For example, I had met with Standard Bank. It's one of the top banks in Africa. They have presence in almost all the African markets, and they had told me that their CEO for the Ugandan division was jailed by the government, or Tanzanian division. I forgot which one it was, for bribery or something like that.
Uh-huh.
So it's a dangerous market at the same time because it's too open and too opportunistic. Means you can also get into trouble.
Yeah, from that point of view, it's like Russia, I don't know, 20 years ago. And what about building partnerships? I've heard that, for example, in China, you have to know Chinese. It's difficult to find someone who speaks in English. How have you managed that?
Okay, so I think there's the past and there's today. So maybe 10 years ago, I think people not speaking English was more commonplace. You really felt like you couldn't connect. Fast forward to today, the story is much different. You have Chinese students graduating from school. They have never been to the United States, or they have never been to Europe, and so on, and still they speak really fluent English. You would be very surprised. So that's one fact that I witnessed as I interview candidates. The English level has gone up. Two, I think technology in China has evolved greatly. They have really surpassed Western countries, even Russia, even the United States. They have social networks that are tied to the WeChat app, for example. You have so many applications on the WeChat platform, and there's a lot of other apps also that you can download. These apps are changing the Chinese people's lives a lot, significantly. And you can pay with your app everywhere, and nobody takes cash anymore. With the coronavirus, they were able to launch on the WeChat platform a health check app. So it records basically what your temperature is based on the officials, and then it traces where you go, and then it overlaps that data with other people and finds other people who could have been contaminated with you. So then you have to go to quarantine. So it does all the stuff for you. It shows you how much China has advanced in technology. And then translation apps. You can just point your camera now, and it does the translation. Or you speak, and it translates it into Chinese. So if you have any problems with someone who doesn't speak English, you have so many solutions out there.
Yeah, even taxi drivers use that tool. When I've been there, I was surprised. They are so funny, guys. But anyway, if we speak about China, for example, do you compete with Alipay there, or you have some different?
No, we're their first partners, actually. We're their first foreign partners. So we've been doing business with them for almost 9, 10 years now. So yeah.
Basically, I heard that Alipay has been created because of the pandemic of 2003, I guess, and they were searching some solutions. They were like Alibaba company were like B2B, then they added B2C solution, and they realized that they need a payment solution, and they created Alipay. So it's traffic actually created their traffic created a field for such kind of solutions.
Same as PayPal and eBay. So if you look at PayPal, PayPal piggybacked on the eBay's network. So eBay was in the US, and then eBay had a really aggressive lady CEO, Meg Whitman, and she had expanded to maybe the European markets, Western European markets via some acquisitions. She had expanded to, I think, South Korea. She had expanded to some Latin American markets, but overall, her expansion kind of stopped in China. They couldn't get into China. And what happened was PayPal's network depended on eBay greatly. So if you look at PayPal's current markets that PayPal is strong in, it's mostly the ex-eBay markets. And Alibaba, being from that region that eBay could not take over, and PayPal had never penetrated China because of the Chinese payments regulation blocking foreign ownership of payment companies, you basically only had Alipay, which launched, and then there was Tenpay, which was one of the licensed 20 or 100 companies. And Tenpay was 10-cent pay, but it was not being used. The license was there, but it was not being used enough. And then about 5 years ago or 6 years ago, they launched during the Chinese New Year a way for people to pay on the WeChat chat app, the red envelopes. So red envelopes is a red envelope is a traditional thing. So when Chinese New Year hits, the grandparents usually give kids a red envelope with money inside, and the amount is not determined. You just put different amounts of money, and they have you select one. It's like a game, Lucky Money it's called. And then you get like maybe 1,000 yuan, or maybe you get 100 yuan. It's not clear how much you're gonna get, so that's why it's Lucky Money. So it's a bit of a gambling. And then they made that they put that same social concept onto the social network, the WeChat network, which is a messenger app, and people started sending money like crazy from one to the other. Business owners sent it to their employees and so on. So it became a whole trend, and everybody downloaded that app that Chinese New Year, and it became really popular. It suddenly got a few 100 million users, and then currently it has about, I think, 1 billion plus users using WeChat.
Amazing. I respect actually Chinese government because they do not block such solutions. For example, they might have blocked Alipay at that time, at that period of time, but they didn't. For example, in some parts of Africa, governments think like, oh, we don't do nothing because it's too dangerous. Some new solutions. Some parts are different in Africa. And what do you think, by the way, how this COVID situation is it somehow shifted minds of governments?
Government is for sure, because as you can see, the U.S. government is struggling with figuring out how to handle this, because there's a lot of misinformation. And I think in the United States, and that's my personal opinion, with COVID-19, you have the Democratic Party attacking Trump because they're saying that Trump didn't do a good job with managing the COVID-19 disease, this and that. The local governments themselves have struggles as well. I think the shutdown in the United States was a bit too strong. I think some countries have done a better job. I think overall the governments are thinking what to do, because one, the economy gets shut down with a pandemic like this one, and then two, there's opportunities for the politics to play differently during a pandemic because people are under stress. So there's parties that are using misinformation to spread fear and to, again, manipulate people to vote for one party or the other one. So they have an incentive a little bit to manipulate the audiences. And then you also have the people being put on pressure, psychological pressure, health pressure, because they're stuck at home and they cannot have any social contact. So it pushes people to more online media for consumption. And also it pushes them to social networks to talk to each other. So people stop doing some stuff in real life, but replace that activity with online communications. As you've seen, Zoom became really popular, and then delivery of food became really popular, and then food pickup became popular. There's lines like communism now, in the United States. As you know, the joke is, in the Soviet Union, you would wait in line, not knowing when you're going to get in, not knowing what you're going to buy, and you just keep waiting in line, and the shelves are empty when you go into the store. And then sometimes there's bananas, sometimes you have nothing. Here it's the same story. It was a bit the same. But in the first few weeks, after that, they were able to figure out the supply chains, and everything replenished again. We have toilet paper, we have all the different things that people needed. But I would say for a country like the United States that takes pride in its capitalism, in having an abundance of products in the shops, it's a bit shameful to experience something like this, but it's a bit difficult to plan for a pandemic. I mean, yes, you can have a playbook, but is that playbook going to be correct? Having a playbook doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be correct. I think technology is a solution, as China is showing us. And a social network that's reliable, I think, is needed. But I think, unfortunately, Facebook became a monopoly. It owns Facebook, WhatsApp, and Instagram, which are the main three ways of communication. So it's essentially a telecom company. And despite the fact that it has such a control, it is not trusted. And because it's not trusted, I think Facebook will have a difficult time launching a payments platform like WeChat Pay. And I think because it doesn't have the trust, I think people will not give their essential data to Facebook. And I think because of that, it also will not be trusted with health data. So we in the Western world, I think, are deprived from having a reliable social network because Facebook killed all the other social networks, including the ones in Russia. VKontakte and Одноклассники were also killed by Facebook.
Yeah, I see that too.
Yeah, so that means, China has its own social network, and that shows that China's decision to protect its own national social network was a good decision. And I think all the countries failed, including Russia.
Yeah, but you see, we have started with China 30 years ago, and look where they are and where we are. I mean, if you take Vladivostok, there is some city near there, and I've seen a picture in the internet. What
familiar with Vladivostok? Yeah, I haven't been there, but I'm familiar. Yeah.
Yeah, you see some Chinese city from there, maybe from some city near Vladivostok. But anyway, 30 years ago there was similar pictures on different sides of the border. But fast forward to these days, it's skyscrapers in China, and Vladivostok is still the same mostly. So yeah, China developed quite well.
But there's another thing. I think we need to stop as a society in being so how do you say it? In appreciating the skyscrapers too much. Why? Because I live in San Francisco partly, and we have skyscrapers here, and they're quite big. But the population of San Francisco is only 850,000 people, so it's not even 1 million people here. and we have skyscrapers. Still, in the Bay Area, we have about 10 million people. The reason why Americans have these skyscraper cities is a bit of a propaganda. It's to showcase the wealth and showcase the grandeur of the American skyline. It's a Cold War thing, actually, to have these skyscrapers. It shows how modern, how developed the city is, and so on. So they accelerated these skyscraper pictures across the whole United States. But if you look at like Kansas City, it does have skyscrapers in the middle. But if you look at the city, it has the skyscrapers and then it's empty land. So are these skyscrapers really needed? They're not really needed. It was, I think, more like a propaganda engine. And if you look at Hong Kong, Hong Kong as a city really does need skyscrapers. Have you been to Hong Kong? I don't know. It's really crazy. I mean, Hong Kong has such a small amount of land, so they really had to go vertical and build skyscrapers everywhere. You have skyscraper after skyscraper after skyscraper. And I think China got the desire to build such great skyscrapers from Hong Kong because it feels that it has to compete with Hong Kong and beat it. And that's why if you look at Shenzhen, which is a city that's like Las Vegas, it was created in 1970s or so. Las Vegas was created actually in 1900s, but Shenzhen was created in the 1970s from scratch. It was just swampland, marshlands in the Pearl River Delta, and the Chinese government decided to invest in Shenzhen and build it as an example city for the rest of China. And they did all the technology investments there. They encouraged people to move into Shenzhen, and then they wanted to build a city that's competing with Hong Kong in its grandeur. And if you look at the zones, they probably had 5-year plans as well. They originally started with Luohu, Futian, two different parts of Shenzhen, and then after that they expanded over to Nanshan, which is the central part, which is the technology hub, and then now they're expanding to Baoyan. It's another area. So you see the skyscrapers and the sophistication level of the skyscrapers getting bigger and bigger and so on. Now they connected Shenzhen with the highway to Hong Kong, and eventually I think all of these cities will merge, and you won't be able to tell the difference between Hong Kong and Shenzhen and Guangzhou and so on. But overall, I think this is a propaganda engine. So who has the highest skyscraper is a bit like a competition. Dubai did the same thing if you look at it. They built like Burj Al Arab, I think, the beautiful building by the sea, the 5-6-star hotel. And then they built the Burj Al Khalifa, which is a kilometer tall, which is kind of crazy. But these are like a way to show the wealth and the prosperity of a country. It doesn't really show the real prosperity of a country, I would say.
Yeah, I see. It's like showing your muscles. What would you advise to startups who searching ideas currently in the FinTech area, when everything is changing, when maybe you see some shifts as anywhere? What would you invest in? Maybe some opportunities. What you would like to get, and I don't know, to hop in. So any advices maybe?
Sure, okay. I mean, I personally found an opportunity in the US market. We don't have a WeChat Pay here, and we don't have a way to pay with QR codes and so on. So with COVID-19, if you look at it, people were really afraid of paying with their credit cards. Americans are really tough and brave people, not as tough as Russians, I would say. Russians are tougher, I have to say. But they when they are scared of something, they're really scared of it. So for example, with coronavirus, they don't know what it is. So right now the restaurants have these pickup windows, and you go and you want to pay with your credit card. Well, in the US, we don't have tap and pay too much because that technology came to the US a little bit late. So you can't just tap and pay with your credit card. Some of the credit cards don't even have it. The US was a magstripe market for the most part. It only switched to EMV chips recently, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, and that even has not propagated enough. Even the EMV chips don't require PIN numbers because Americans don't like to type stuff, or so they were used to signing the magstripe. So it was really difficult to change the American consumers' behaviors. In time for COVID-19, we were not able to switch to a digital or a contactless payment solution. Even if people have iPhone phones, they don't have the Apple Pay set up. Even if they have Google phones, they don't have Android phones, they don't have Google Pay set up. So people are not using contactless payments on the phone or with the cards. So that means each time they have to insert that card to the machine or hand over the card to the restaurant. And now with COVID-19, they're so scared. So the opportunity I saw was a QR code-based payment solution, and that's what we developed in the last month with our teams across the world. So we now have a QR code-based solution, and we integrated that into FasterPay. We're doing some final tests to make sure that the app works really well. We will be distributing QR codes to restaurants so that they can put a sticker outside, and the user can scan the QR code sticker, and they'll be taken to a menu, and then they can select whatever they want from the menu, and they can hit buy and proceed to making a payment. So that was the opportunity that we saw here in San Francisco from COVID-19, and then we built a product like that. Now, what are my advices for other companies? Well, don't build a QR code-based payment solution because I want to, offer that to all the companies. No, I'm just joking. But I think people need to find the need. They need to find a gap in the users' behavior and also the market, and they have to merge those two together. So as I said, the first idea we had was how do we help people pay for games on Facebook? And that was in Southeast Asia. A lot of game developers were having challenges. So that's the merchant side with taking payments from Southeast Asian users. And the Southeast Asian users, they want to play, they want to level up, but there's no payment options offered on the game. So we connected those two pieces together. So it's an easy hanging fruit. It's a low hanging fruit. This one is a bit more difficult because you have to go door to door and to do sales for the QR code payment solution. It's cost intensive in the United States. So I have to find solutions for how to propagate it, maybe with partnerships and so on. So that's what I'm trying to figure that out. And then if you look at opportunities, well, neobanks, I think, are a trend. So you can follow the trends. In Europe, you have all these neobanks that got created. That means there's a need for people to move away from using a bank account that tries to do everything for them, and they just want to have a bank account that allows them to pay. So there has to be a debit card attached to it, a digital bank on your phone, so you can see the balances. And as soon as you make a payment with the card, it should show up on the account. But I think a QR code-based payment solution would be even better than that, because then you don't have to have this physical card to pay with at all. So that could be even better. Now, there's other small needs like currency exchange. People need to do remittance. People need to pay their bills, bill payments. So I think each of these are different problems. And I think if you look at it, VCs typically invest in a special problem and then a company that solves that problem. So we have to see what problems are out there, inventory them, pick the worst problem. And then the way that the VCs usually categorize the problems is vitamin, aspirin versus antibiotic. So it's better to find problems that need antibiotics to cure, because then that means the intensity of the problem is much bigger. And I think the people will be more willing to spend money with the antibiotic style problems versus candy, like, chocolate candy. Well, chocolate candy is nice to have, but you don't really need it. So you're not going to pay that much money. An antibiotic and a candy might be the same size, but you're going to be paying 20 times more for the antibiotic because it's a life and death situation. So I think that's kind of the ideas that I would give. I think if you, I don't know who the audience is here, but I think mostly probably Russian speaking. And I think Russians are very smart people. And what they need to do is, I think they need to look at the opportunities a little bit more and figure out how to commercialize the opportunities. build products that are end-to-end, well thought out, that really solve the problem, not just focus on a small feature, but build a product that solves the problem end-to-end. So if they did that, I think they would also have more opportunities in the global landscape. I think Russia faces some trust issues. Russia and Russians face trust issues when they go to the Western world. So what they need to do is they need to work on trust, maybe form partnerships that are international and diverse. That way they can overcome that trust issue, and then that will allow them to expand into new markets if they're a product company. If they're an outsourcing company, I think there's a lot of opportunities for the great developers that you guys have to find jobs and opportunities abroad, and they already know how to find it at this point. So I don't think that's a problem anymore. So for different people, there's a lot of different ways that they can participate in the fintech ecosystem. If they want a job, they can find a job and work on cool projects. If they want to create something, they can form partnerships and find needs in different developing markets or existing developed markets. But again, regulation and compliance is going to be important. And I think Russia usually suffers on that side because there's still a lot of ongoing embargoes against Russian individuals or Russian background people. So you have to overcome that stigma a little bit. And then if you are developing a technology that can be sold on a SaaS basis to, let's say, a fintech company, then I think the opportunities are much more wider open because you're just a technology provider. But again, you have to house the data most likely in the European Union. You most likely have to create a company that's in the European Union so that you can overcome that trust factor. So those are my advices I would give perhaps to the audience. And yeah.
Yeah, that's good advices actually. And also, I think we need to cut soon. So in the end, I also always ask about some mistake which been done in past, and some something that we can learn from your mistake, and something that you learned from that maybe important mistake. I believe you have had many, but maybe something.
Well, I mean, mistakes. Well, I mean, we made a lot of mistakes for sure. So I look back at our company, and I think we're 10 years old right now. We started in about 2010. We're in 2020. 2015 was kind of the midway here. I think we made some mistakes on selecting people and changing the type of people we hire. So we used to hire people who had potential. So if you only hire people who have a potential and you don't hire enough experienced people or enough stable people, now stability also comes with age. So I have to emphasize that. I think if you're between the ages of 20 and 30, that's the age where you're supposed to make mistakes, a lot of mistakes. You have to explore the world, you have to make mistakes, you have to learn from those mistakes, make more mistakes, and so on. That's where the growth comes. And then when you're from 30 years of age to 40 years of age, you have to make more calculated mistakes, or you have to control the mistakes a little bit more. So I would say we're really young-hearted at my company. We had a lot of young people, and I think all these people were in the initial mistake-making age of their life, so 20s to 30s. I think we should have mixed in a little bit more people from the 30s to 40s, but it was difficult for us to incorporate both of those into one culture. And then also we try to do too many things at once as a company. We try to, have a company that appeals to the games. We had to have a company that also appeals to, let's say, e-commerce, travel, and other verticals. And that was difficult to maintain from a cultural standpoint. So if you hire people who are really young, they know games, but then if they have to go to a fintech conference, there's a difference in culture between the two different types of conferences. In gaming conference, people get drunk, they have fun, they dress up in a casual way, they talk in a direct and not polite form way. Instead of saying "we," they say "ty," and that's how they communicate. And then if you go to a formal conference, everything is much more polite, much more distance. You still have people getting drunk a little bit, but not as much as the gaming conferences. So you have to figure out what your cultural focus is going to be. So one, you have to recruit for that cultural focus. And two, you really have to also maintain that and not try to become something you're not. Or if you are going to become something you're not, then you have to hire the people that you don't have. And I think that's where we didn't do a good job in 2015. I think through those failures and so on with the teams that we created, we learned from our mistakes, and we decided to actually split the company between Paymentwall, which is this PSP, which is a bit more sophisticated and focused, and then Faster Pay, which is a bit more entrepreneurial and experimental, and then Terminal 3, which is young and fun and gaming oriented, which is a bit niche. So I set the ambition levels for the 5-year plans for each of these companies differently. And I also now categorize the people that we hire based on cultural fit for each of the different divisions. So when people join us, they're actually joining that specific company. And that has helped us a little bit. And I think that's the lesson that I learned over the years, that you really have to maintain the focus and the culture of each of the different products and companies that you have. And I think it's working out really well. So we're getting a lot of inbound leads right now from very prominent companies in the FinTech space or in the e-commerce space and so on to work with Paymentwall, and that's great for us. On the Faster Pay side, we're able to play with the users, we're able to play with the merchants, we're able to listen to what their needs are, we're able to figure out how to solve their problems in different ways. That's the experimental product, which is really fun. And then you have Terminal 3, which is something that we have mastered over the years, obviously, the gaming space. And then we're trying to make sure that it remains young and innovative and fun. So that's how we learn. That's what we learned.
These are really interesting observations, especially from the point of view of age, making mistakes from 20 to 30. It's really easier for the psychology. It was really pleasure for me to speak with you. I was a little bit nervous because of speaking with someone who running so much of different companies, successful worldwide companies, but you're very nice, and I don't know, very nice person. So if next time when you will be in Novosibirsk, I will definitely come there from Tomsk.
I'll drive to Tomsk. I haven't seen it. I've seen Novosibirsk, but I haven't seen Tomsk.
I would not advise that because we don't have such great highways as in Europe or maybe in US. So, but you might.
S7 Airlines is not bad actually.
What? I'm sorry.
S7 Airlines is not too bad actually. S7.
Yeah. And also train. It does the job.
And I really like the people from Siberia. I really felt the difference between people from Siberia versus the people from Moscow. So I think because the life is so interesting there, because it's so much snow, and you really have a critical life danger, right? Because if you're stuck outside in the snow, you actually could die. So people face this life and death situation on a daily basis. If they're left outside, they really have to be conscious. They have to be thinking. So I think people think a lot more in Siberia before they talk. That's what I noticed. There's a pause, and you're like, why is that person pausing? Because there's so much energy that needs to be exuded to talk, but not as much if it's in your brain. So people think a little bit more and then they speak. Whereas in Moscow, it's more like, oh, whatever. They talk a little bit, faster, and they sometimes don't even think and so on. But I really appreciate, I think, how the world's climate changed the human behavior and how people behave differently in Siberia than other places. It's a really unique culture. And I think in the summertime it's beautiful. I'm scared of the winters.
Yeah, I see the difference between the Moscow people from Moscow. They're fast, a little bit rude, and stuff like that.
A bit, yes. Because in Siberia you have to collaborate also, because if you have trouble you have to ask for help from someone. So I think people are a bit more collaborative, because to survive against the elements you really have to have that cooperation, collaboration. Versus in Moscow it's not as bad, you know, it's like a city basically. So
yeah, and because of the winter, for me this pandemic changed nothing, because I'm sitting here 8 years already in this office in front of web camera.
It's true. Yeah, that's true. It doesn't change anything for and people I think digitize much faster over there in Novosibirsk.
Yeah.
But I think the government did a great job, because the internet has always been good. So I've been working with people you know, from there, from the region, since I was in college or before college even. So since I was 17, 18 or so. I'm 41 right now, so it's about 22 years, 23 years that I've been you know, working with people in Siberia, and they always had internet. It was not the fastest, but they had it, and it's evolved. And the government did a great job, I think, investing in those cities and so on. So not too bad, but they could invest more. I think these cities need more flights. If they can create more flights, I think that would be the best investment Putin could do. Please give more flights, Putin.
Yeah, I beg for that too. I agree with that.
It would be amazing to have more flights. I really believe it. Yes.
Okay, Honor. Really, thank you for the dialogue. It was one of the interesting dialogues of all times.
It was my pleasure.
Okay, see you. Okay.